All right, I'm rolling.
All right. This is a production prepared for the 50th anniversary celebration of the University Baptist Church. We have with us today three of the original founders of the church, and we're going to interview them regarding some of their reflections and recollections about the beginning of the church. I'm going to introduce them at this moment. On my left, this Mrs. J. Leon Clark, Gertrude, whose husband was a professor at LSU. Dr. Maurice Vick, who, along with his wife Whit, was also a member of the team. He also was a professor at the university. And then Mrs. George Deere, Tossie, who's not only did her husband work at the university, she did as well. I am Al Bertrand, also a retiree from LSU, and I'm going to serve as moderator. We're going to begin we're going to begin our session with the reading of the first two paragraphs of the historical sketch prepared for the founding day ceremonies of the University Church, and then we're going to ask each of our panel members to respond to questions. The University Baptist Chapel was established through the efforts of the Missions Committee of the First Baptist Church. Mr. S.A. LaCroix was chairman of the committee. We had the cooperation of the Reverend A.E. Pardue, State Superintendent of Mission, Mr. E. Roger Jones, Mr. Chester Best, Mrs. Albert Weehee, Miss Faye Patrick, and others served as temporary workers, along with an executive committee appointed by the First Church, consisting of Dr. J. Leon Clark, chairman, Mr. Homer Tanner, and Mr. Barden Nelson. This committee, together with Dr. W.E.B. Lockridge, director of the Baton Rouge General Hospital, who served as a pastor, were made responsible for chapel activities. The first services were held on Sunday, February 9, 1947, in the Agricultural Auditorium of Stubbs Hall on the LSU campus, with approximately 50 persons present. The program of the chapel consisted of 2 worship services each Sunday, Sunday school and training union. The Sunday school at first had only 4 classes: adults, college men, college women, and children. Mr. Tanner served as superintendent, Ms. Faye Patrick as secretary, and Mr. Barden Nelson as training union director. The chapel council was soon organized and consisted of members of the original executive committee and Dr. Maurice Vick. Mr. Tanner served as treasurer and Mr. Nelson as clerk. Now, all of you were there when this took place. I'm going to ask Dr. Vick to tell us what he recalls about the discussions that went on at the First Baptist Church of Baton Rouge, preliminary to the establishment of the chapel on the campus. Dr. Vick?
I was not on the committee at the First Church as such. I was on it to a degree in that S.A. LaCroix had been my roommate in college, and we had talked about the establishing of a mission point here on the campus with the idea in mind that sometime in the future it might become a church. We were aided by the people you have mentioned there. There's one that's not there. It was Mr. I.M. Causey, who was the chairman of the Board of Deacons, the First Church, permanent chairman. And he did quite a bit to help us in a money way. He and Warren Watson were very effective in.
Gertrude, you and your husband were on the original committee. What do you?
We were there from day one,
Uh-huh.
and I was not the active one in the other two, but my husband was, from the planning and begging and borrowing and all of it. He was there from the first.
Tasha, do you have any recollections?
Oh, well, I was not on the original committee at all. I came later with a group that was considered charter members of the church, but I was not on the original committee.
All right. Well, apparently then there was a felt need at the First Baptist Church for the establishment of a mission church on campus. And as I recall, I was there too. There was talk about the fact that the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Episcopals and the Catholics all had churches near the campus, and they felt somehow that the Baptists ought to be there too.
Weren't they on the campus?
Yes.
They all were. We had the union buildings, student union buildings on the campus. That's
Right.
what drove us in a way.
Right.
To feel
Yeah,
the need of
we want to talk a little bit about that. Okay, now let's move to another question. All of you, at least two of you, were there at the first meetings of the mission group, the chapel group, as it was called, I think. And Gertrude, what do you recall about the first meetings that were held after the mission group was established?
Well, you know that we were permitted to use the student union building. We couldn't have a church on the campus, but we could help in this way.
Yeah.
And that's really where we got our students and picked them up.
I
and sent
think
them in.
we were meeting over in the agricultural auditorium
Yes.
called Stubbs Hall a little bit. As I recall, we took a little corner of the auditorium and set up there. And
And
it was kind of makeshift, but we kind of felt close, and as I recall, and together. Maurice, you want to add to that?
Well, of course, the Methodist and the Presbyterian chiefly were on campus, but they were over at the music hall. We felt like we needed the place there for a meeting of the Baptist students, because there were quite a few that were unchurched, and we wanted to give them a church. So we met there on Stubbs Hall, and we were very, very glad to get it.
Yeah.
It was real nice. We had no trouble at all finding rooms for our Sunday school.
Do you remember whether some negotiation had to be made with the university for the use of that site?
I don't know of any negotiations. They may have just told us to go ahead and use it.
Yes, obviously somebody had to be
Yes,
given permission.
that's true.
All right. Every organization, and including churches, grows or doesn't grow because of events that occur in its early history. I'm going to ask, Tasa, you were here in its early history, and it's found as one of the founders and so on. What incidences or developments or events stand out in your mind as having a special significance in those early days of our church?
Well, I think the smallness of the group was an advantage to us and helped us decide a lot of the ways to go. There was a closeness with us and a special caring for each other. And I think that's still a trademark of University Baptist Church.
All right, do you want to add anything, Maurice?
We used to have a great time at our council meetings, I guess you would call them.
Uh-huh.
We met in one another's houses,
Yeah.
and we'd have a dish supper, and the men would get into one room there and talk over the business of the church, and the women would be back in the rest of the house there talking about whatever women talk about.
In the kitchen, probably.
It was a closeness, as Tossie says, that has always been, I guess, a mark of this church as individuals.
Right. How about you, Gertrude, what
Unless
do you
you're gonna
remember?
cover it later, if you aren't, I'd like to say now. I think the union building and access to the union building where we could meet the students and where they could meet us, and where we were allowed to cook and feed them.
Mhm.
Now, I think that just had a lot to do with making them feel close to us too, because
Mhm.
I don't know whether Tossie was there then or not. We really did cook and feed students.
I remember.
Now, that-
And of course, church people too, but not to the same extent. We had one dinner, one tea, one Sunday afternoon thing right after another.
Right,
Not enough to rub anybody the wrong way, but enough to keep people interested. And in these activities on these tea parties, we invited people from other churches, the nearby churches, Baptist churches, and I think it helped them to have respect for our new endeavor and to help us along.
What
This
here,
union building, you're talking about, that's the Baptist Union.
Yeah, I'm
Yes.
talking about the
Yeah.
Baptist
No,
student
not the
union.
union building.
No,
on
I'm
the
talking
campus.
about
No,
the
no,
Baptist
right.
union.
the Baptist Student Union, which had been built a few years before
was
we got to change.
relatively new.
Yes, it was new.
Yeah, just a year or so before we got there.
Well, University Baptist Church still feeds the students at the union building on certain occasions.
Yeah. Well, what I'm hearing you say is that the early days of University Baptist Church were really when we were close and united and working especially with the students. And I remember, like Gertrude said, that we had a meal almost every Sunday for the students.
We fed them.
We fed them, and I think they appreciated that. That was back in the days when students were not as affluent as they probably are today, and it was meaningful. And they contributed to our church. We had many of the student leaders as members of our church, as the records show. Okay, so early on, we were a close, intimate family.
Let me say another thing too that I think helped the church to grow. This was before the days when every student had a car. And of course, if we didn't get close to the students, they either didn't go or they had to provide the transportation uptown. And we just made it convenient for them.
Right, I know those days. And we also took a lot of them home with us.
Right.
Which I think brought them closer together. And we, like Maurice said, we didn't have room at our little church to have our events, our business and social events, so we went to our houses, and we got to know each other intimately. I remember that the first thing that appealed to me about University Church is how close we were together. Everybody knew everyone else, and we all had a great feeling about being a member of a family, a church family, so to speak. All right,
This
we need-
being close brings to mind the fact that we didn't have very many children, and they didn't have any place to meet. So their classrooms were car. They were parked out in front there, and the instructors were ex-GIs, and they enjoyed it.
Yes.
But all the little boys and little girls put together, I guess it would make over half a dozen.
That's an interesting recollection. I remember my kids I had only one that was old enough for Sunday school at that
Yeah.
time. The other one was just a baby. But meeting in the car was a great thing for those kids, and they took their Sunday school lessons very seriously in the car. We also used the Baptist Student Union for the college
Yes.
Sunday school classes, and later on we rented a little house for our pastor, and we brought some of the classes over to the pastor's houses for their class meetings and social functions. So we were struggling, but we were having fun, I think. Okay, we'll have to move along. And the next question that I want to have the three of you respond to is, I know one that you'll have some very good thoughts about. I want you to identify personalities who deserve special credit for making the University Baptist Church what it is today. And it does. Let's just look through the whole history of the church here, and if you can pick out special people. Now, let me preface your remarks with this observation. Each of the people here were special in the development of University Baptist Church. So don't talk about yourselves, because we'll take it for granted that you were there and you were helping all the way. But who in your mind would you call? Tassi, why don't we start with you?
Well, in spite of the fact you said we shouldn't talk about ourselves, I can talk about them, can
I guess so.
I? Well, I just want to say a word of special thanks for that original committee, because they really, I think, sacrificed time and energy, and we really owe them a vote of appreciation. I want to mention that.
I'll second that.
Sunday school teacher that I remember was Sudie Evans.
Mm-hmm. Sudie Evans, great lady.
When the missions work, I remember the Hogans.
Did you know Miss Bessie, her sister?
Yes, very well.
Mm-hmm.
There were a good many, outstanding people. We had outstanding people
Mm-hmm.
in the group.
Okay. Maurice, you want to name some?
Yes, I'd like to mention especially Dr. W.E.B. Lockridge.
I agree.
And he really guided us. And of course, he was sort of an engineer in a way. Okay.
Okay, you want to ask him the question again?
All right. Let me go ahead and ask you the question. Did you get Tassi? You got
Mhm.
Tassi? Okay. All right. Maurice, who in your mind stands out as one of the personalities that one or more personalities who contributed to making University Baptist Church what it is today?
I think W.E.B. Lockridge would be the one that would especially come to mind.
He was our first
He
pastor.
was our first pastor, and from time to time, when we needed one, well, he would step in.
He always came when we needed him.
He and Pardue
Yeah.
both were, and
Reverend
Ernest,
Pardue.
and Ernest Price.
Right.
Ernest did quite a bit for us.
Ernest Price.
He was director of the YMCA.
He was the executive director of the YMCA, but he stood in and did the sermons whenever we needed it.
That's true.
I might come back to Dr. Lockridge and say that he had to fit us into a very busy schedule, because he was administrator of what was then the Baton Rouge General Hospital.
Yes, true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we had lots of beautiful people. Uncle John Dees,
Yeah.
and then
I
Big
love
John.
he and his wife.
Big John Hurt,
Yeah.
Peggy.
Yeah. Okay, you heard. Those were early people. How about later?
Later. Well, Al Hubbs would come to mind.
All right.
As,
Al Hubbs, Homer Tanner was one I think of.
yeah, well, Homer
Homer was
Homer
there
one
early.
of the originals.
Mhm.
Yeah, Homer, poor fella,
Mhm.
he had to get up and go over there on Sunday mornings and
Mhm.
bail out the place because it was rain full of water.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Gertrude, think about now, I will say we started in the late 40s. Let's move on to about the 50s, 60s, 70s. Who do you remember from that period in time as standing out?
Well, I don't know if I can split it up in decades like you have or not. From the beginning of the whole thing, if you would ask me who I put first, I'd put my husband first, but now that
Oh,
would
sure.
be a
Well,
little bit.
I
Because
made that
I remember that
observation.
it was he who took off a day from work to go and get the old building that we had to bring from somebody from Pineville or somewhere.
Mhm.
It was, somebody had to go and everybody was busy, but it was he who went. And,
Let me interrupt to explain what Gertrude is talking about. To get our first church building on the Chime Street location, we were able to, thanks to Mrs. Childers, who had collected, I
$1,000.
guess, donations from students and others, and had, I think, up about $1,200 or something like that. She donated this money to the purchase of an old Army chapel that was no longer in use. White frame building with 2x4 benches, and what Gertrude is mentioning is her husband, Dr. Clark, went to the Alexandria area and oversaw the transportation of that building to the Chime Street location. I think they had to saw the building in two to get it there, but that was a kind of an interesting.
Glued it back together.
Yeah, and glued back together. Okay.
Well, there were two buildings, but they moved at the same time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
There was another day that he took off from work to borrow money for some of the projects that were going on. I don't know why the bank didn't want, I believe that was for the minister's house. Who was the minister with the two?
Ben Patrick.
Ben Patrick.
No, not that one. The one with the two babies, two little.
Al Henry?
Al Henry. I believe it was his. This is not church directly, but certainly indirectly, and he didn't have credit at the bank. And the bank wouldn't take signatures from a committee here. So it fell the obligation of somebody to help.
Fortunately, Leon had some banking connections.
Where he had a little,
And
he knew a few people,
and
that's
he
all.
was
He
able
didn't have anything else.
to arrange that. Those are the kinds of things that people never hear about, but which are very fundamental and basic to the growth of an institution like a church. You know, I remember Mrs. Childers and her dedication to the students. I was one of the students who went to her house, and we couldn't give but a nickel or dime to her collection plate, but over the years it built up to the money that they used to buy that. Now, we should mention, of course, that the University Baptist Church put up the money to buy the land, at least the first parcel of land that we had there. And that was a great blessing because we could not have afforded it. Okay, well, I was going to think of leaders that came along a little later. Some of them were our pastors, but others were lay leaders that took. Now, Tassie hasn't mentioned her husband, because I guess I told her not to, but I'm going to mention George Deere, who was a little later now. What do you remember about George and his work, Maurice?
Well, George was always a happy soul,
Yeah.
and he brightened up most every meeting we had.
Mhm.
But
I remember he was always into something,
Yeah,
and then I remember people who served on the committee to buy this property. I think Earl Hogan and Harry Richardson
yeah.
and others like that who, spent a lot of time trying to get it to a price we could afford.
Yes, plus the fact that the lady we bought it from,
Yeah, was a little bit,
her daughter didn't want her to sell it
Yeah.
to us.
they were, they had to
Another-
be convinced, and I
another
guess
thing.
our committee worked with, I remember them going time after time to talk with them. They finally swung the deal, so to speak.
There was another family that came about that time, and that was the Fry family.
Yeah, oh yeah.
They had children, they wanted in Sunday school.
Oh, yes, of course, I knew them, I grew up with them, I knew them as undergraduates and so on. And the Fry family were always there in the beginning, and they not only furnished children for our Sunday school classes, they helped us with the,
He was very active in the junior role.
yeah, right. Okay, now, I also guess we ought to mention some of our pastors through the years. I remember, I guess, every one that we have had, and each one brought a certain personality, a certain style, I guess, to the church. And you mentioned Dr. Lockridge, but he was followed by John Hurt, who came as an assistant to him, I guess, in the beginning. What do you remember about John, Maurice?
That can be repeated.
Yeah.
So John is a happy-go-lucky soul and a good preacher. He wasn't with us too awfully long. He went up to Jonesboro to be pastor there. But I remember him as more as a sort of a son than I would as a pastor. And of course, we had his father, Big John,
Yeah.
that kind of rode herd on him a little bit. But we enjoyed John.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. John was well trained. He was a good
Yes.
speaker.
I thought so.
And
Yeah, he was.
he brought a certain flavor that the university students, I think, enjoyed especially, because he could speak their language, so to speak.
Yes, he did.
Okay, well, he was followed by Ben Patrick. Gertrude, what do you want to recall about Ben?
I can remember.
Ben and Lou?
No, I think I probably had more contact with her directly than I did with him, but they were good people. I cannot put my finger now on any of the steps that were taken maybe during
What
his.
stands out in my mind is that church newsletter that Lou used
She
to prepare.
started that.
And we all look forward to see it because our names are almost always in the newsletter. There weren't so many of us, and it was.
What I remember
Uh-huh.
had to do with Molly Lockridge and Ben.
Uh-huh.
She had known him back when he was a student up in North
Ted.
Louisiana.
Mhm.
And, Ben used two pulpits, you could remember.
Mhm.
He would read the announcements and so forth in one pulpit, and then he'd go over and preach in the other one.
Mhm.
And so Molly always teased him, because I remember she went up one day and said, Father Patrick, what are you giving up for Lent this year? He was quite Episcopal.
He too was a good leader, and our church made some strides under Ben. Now.
Well, he brought Tossie and George out there. He used to visit your mother,
Yes, he did a lot.
and pastor of the first church didn't do any visitations.
How about, I think he was followed by Al Henry, was he?
Mhm.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Do you remember him, Tassie?
Very well.
Okay, what do
Yes.
you remember about Al Henry?
I liked Al personally very much and was very fond of his wife. Al was inefficient in a lot of ways. I think he probably had never quite found his true niche. He needed to be in something else.
Yeah.
But he was very conscientious.
The thing I remember about Al is he had milk leg, and he would preach at that little podium, and he put a chair up there and put his knee up the end of the chair and preached that way.
My recollections of Al are sort of parallel tosses. I felt really kind of not sorry but uneasy because I think he had gone into the ministry because his parents.
Remember his name?
No,
Andrew,
Andrew, what?
Something Esky.
but,
And he came before Michalowski?
no, he was
No,
here
he
at the
came
same time that Jim Young was here.
Oh,
He
same
came-
time as him, okay.
yeah.
Okay, Maurice, we were talking about our pastors down the line, and we had just gotten through talking about our recollections of Al Henry. I think Bruce Evans, one of our own students, who was on our early councils and so on, was our next pastor. And Bruce was a young, shall I say, full of vigor type, and we were proud of him. What do you remember about Bruce?
I remember it, first of all, that he was a student. He was an engineering student, not
Engineering, you know.
And he was our, for the time being at least, he was our church janitor.
We helped him pay his way through school.
We had a young lady in the church at that same time, who was Miss Louisiana.
Right, turned out to be his wife later
Turned out to
on.
be his wife. He had the the RAs, and Ann had the GAs,
Yeah,
and then they were married.
yeah.
But
Okay. Gertrude, do you want to say something?
No, I can't think of anything to add to that.
All right. Tassie, your recollections of Bruce?
Well, I think we're all in denial if we say we don't recollect anything about Bruce. I don't know, something happened to Bruce in his thinking. Either we got too hard to manage, or he wasn't quite up to the job. It didn't work out too well with Bruce.
Yeah. I think what Tassie is alluding to is that Bruce came along at the time that, I'll call it, for lack of a better term, the anti-establishment movement had begun
Rebellion.
sweeping through the universities and the country. And he sort of got caught up in that movement as I interpreted what happened. And he began to try to move the church in directions that did not appeal to some of the more moderate members.
And I think mostly he didn't know which way to go.
Yeah, and that's
He
right.
was lost in it.
Yeah, and he didn't have as Tassie said, a clear sense of
Where he wanted to go.
what he wanted. But we loved him. But we had, and I remember the meetings that we had. I guess in a way, Bruce is the only minister that we ever sort of hinted that he should look for something else. I remember the meetings, and Bruce, of course, felt hurt and his ego bruised and so on. But he was good for our church while he lasted, and he contributed very much to our church. And I for one, hated to see him go in the way that he went, and we have maintained, good relations with him, I'm glad to say. And after he left, we sort of didn't have time to go through the whole process of finding a new pastor, so we used interim pastors for a while. And the first interim pastor who served, I don't know, several months, I've forgotten how long, was Dr. Michalowski. And he was an interesting fellow with he was a Canadian, I think, but with English or Irish connections as well. Tossie, what do you think?
Well, I think he was a real intellectual. That's what I think about him,
Mhm.
what I remember about him.
Mhm.
He was very sincere, and I enjoyed listening to him.
Mhm.
We didn't have him as a pastor long enough to judge his abilities there,
Mhm.
but I think he did a lot for us.
Okay,
I was
Maurice,
here.
you want to add anything?
He's a remarkable man.
Yeah.
I guess maybe of all the pastors we've had, he had the best overall experience
Mhm.
in education. He was an Oxford
He
graduate.
came from the seminary, as I
He came from the seminary. He was on the faculty at the seminary. And he left here and went to seminary in Switzerland.
Mhm.
He went to Canada.
Okay.
Well, he went to Canada, but he went to
And then
Canada
to
after he
Switzerland?
went to the,
That's interesting.
yeah, he was,
Russell Kahn.
he wrote it, he came from, I think he went to Edmonton,
It was-
Canada, but he was in Switzerland for a little while before then.
Yeah. Okay, let's move now to our next pastor, which was Jim Young, Air Force veteran, and a real down-to-earth type of fellow, I guess you'd call him.
Driver of a Coca-Cola truck.
Right. Gertrude, you call?
I think everybody would remember him.
Uh-huh.
I don't believe anybody in the church disliked him. I don't think so. And he was just good not only in the pulpit, but he could take on any kind of little job that somebody wanted done, and I wanted a few at that time, and help us out with it. If he didn't do it, he could tell us how to go about getting it
Let
done.
me follow through on that thought. I told Jim one day that I was thinking of tiling the patio at our house,
He said, let me do it.
Yeah, he said, I have a brother-in-law or somebody who's in a tile business. We'll go get some tile and I'll come down and help you tile it. And he came out there, he and his good wife, and we had a big time, but he got out on his knees and then dropped and did several days' work for me. And, that's more than a pastor.
Well, he did, not that kind, but I happened to have to be out of commission for one summer when my sisters were here, and my refrigerator went out, and they didn't know how to go about buying one here, so he said, don't worry about it, I'll get you one. So he went off and bargain hunted or whatever he did, and got me a new refrigerator right in there.
Right.
Well, I'm interested because he did my patio also. My husband had died, and he thought we had to have it tiled, so we had a lot of good times doing it, a lot of hard work.
Right, but he was the kind of fellow you enjoyed working with.
Well, he never waited to see if you could get somebody to do something. He did it.
He did it himself.
One of my first little jobs after my husband died, somebody had driven my car into the carport and parked it the wrong way, and I backed out and took the whole steps off the carport with it.
The steps got in the way.
He was out there the next day and fixed the steps himself. So
That was
he
kind of
was a
fellow Jim
marvelous
was.
person.
You have any special stories about Jim, Maurice?
Well, he put down the tile for the patio for
For where?
Lacey Davis.
I felt very sorry later on when he went to Louisiana College to learn that his eyesight failed a little
Yeah.
bit on him, because he so loved to work with his hands and tools, and this must have been a real, tragedy for him. And
Well, I would like to add that I think Jim was a scholar, really. During the years I taught Sunday school, we used the convention series. And whenever I saw that he had written the commentaries for that particular time, I knew it was going to be great.
mhm.
He was really a scholarly person deep down.
I got a copy of that, and we cherish it. It was a good thing. Now during
He was a graduate of the Methodist school too,
yeah,
seminary.
that may be one of the reasons he did such a good job. Go ahead. I was going to mention that one of the things Jim did, and I think it was good for our church and good for him too, is that he made an arrangement with a pastor from England, I believe it was, to trade churches for a period of 2 or 3 months, I believe it was, just to give each an experience in another country. And that's how we got Andrew McKee here. What do we recall about him? Maurice, you want to go first?
Andrew was a very likable little fella, and he was a Scotchman, and from really from South Scotland, and the pastor of a church in London. But he was a bit taken aback by quite a bit of the things that we did over here.
I can imagine.
Yeah, we had
But he took it in stride.
yeah, we had a case there where one of the,
Well, I guess we need to move along in the interest of time. After Jim decided to take a job as a professor at Louisiana College,
We got George.
That's right. We got our present pastor,
George.
and he's been with us how long now?
20-something years.
25 years. I think that's a record for churches pretty much everywhere. And that means one thing. He was good for us, and maybe we were good for him. I don't know. But do you want to make a comment about George, Tassie?
Well, I could make a lot of comments about George. I was on the search committee that helped to bring him here.
Right.
And this is his only pastorate he's ever had. So I think he has grown into a leader, not only for the church, but the community. And he's helped to make this church a respected church among all the churches in Baton Rouge.
Which is a great
Yes.
accomplishment.
And that's not mentioning all the physical advances we've made in the acquirement of new land and new buildings.
Maurice,
He's been a good pastor.
Just a word from you.
And his main asset, I think, has been his spiritual and pastoral leadership. If there's ever a need of any kind, he's there to help with it. I really can speak only in superlative terms about him.
Maurice?
I think George has been possibly the best pastor we've ever had. That's his strong point. And
And you want to
anytime
emphasize
he
pastor there.
he was right there.
That's what I wanted to say, that it's not only that the church members know him, he knows them, he knows us. And in knowing us personally, as he seems to know everybody, I think there's just nothing that would make a pastoral relationship better than that.
He's a regular fellow, I
Yes,
guess.
he is.
Okay.
And he's not too good to do a little something besides preach. I mean, he can get out of earth on the other side.
We could talk a little longer, but I guess we need to move along. I wanted you to say just a word or so about our other church staff. We've had some associate pastors, we've had some choir directors especially, I think, that we may want to mention. The first one that stands out in my mind as a choir director is Don Beam.
Done then?
Done then, done. He was one who put the university choir into a feeling of professionalism. I think that's the way I would express it. He wrote music, and they did innovative things and that kind of. And he had such a good sense of humor, as I recall. And
Well, I didn't have any contact with, I wasn't in the choir
Mhm.
in any way then, and I didn't have a lot of contact with him, and have not had with any of the choir directors very much, except our present one.
okay, we've had a couple of others.
Well, I can't carry a tune in the bucket, but I'd like to say just one word. Ernie Willis.
Okay.
Ernie was
Uh-huh.
she was the soul of the church here for some time.
Okay. Tassie, what do you recall about our department?
About music people?
Uh-huh.
Well, like Gertrude, I haven't had any contact with them much, but I really have great respect for our president, choir director, and music director, and he's listed as counselor for aging people.
Mhm.
And he has been so attentive to me in that regard. I've learned to value his service a lot.
And we should mention his predecessor, who I thought
Yes,
contributed.
he was very good.
Lee Porter.
Oh, I was thinking about the one down from New Orleans. What was his name?
Yarbrough.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he was-
Leroy.
He was good.
Yeah.
He was a magician for us, bringing out the possibilities in the
Okay.
choir. He was great.
I did get interested with him.
Yeah.
He got my interest
Yeah.
in the choir.
Leroy is a great fellow. He was here. He took us over the hump. We have not had too many associate pastors. In fact, I don't know of anybody who served that capacity before Carrie came along.
We had one when Bruce was
We
here.
did.
Oh, we had one when Bruce was here?
I think we had more than one.
I don't even remember.
You don't remember him?
Snyder.
He,
Snyder.
Snyder. Oh, yes.
Snyder.
Yes, we did.
Bill Snyder.
Right. Yeah.
But he was,
He
if
went
I-
to Medicare.
We're
did he
still.
leave before Bruce left, or stayed till the end?
He stayed.
Till the
He
end.
left a little bit before, I think. I think the climate got a little bit,
Uh-huh.
and he got out of the ministry actually.
Yes, he's with the Medicare,
Yeah, with the Social Security.
Social Security, that's
Yeah.
right.
But Kerry came along, and he's been with us how many years now? Oh.
15?
Yeah, he's been here a long time, and he sort of carries the church's, what I call, the legwork of the church, for a better word.
I don't know how he would have survived during
He,
Joy's illness in that year
That's right.
without Carrie. He's been great.
And he's always there when we need to consult with somebody about doing something or other. He's been a great member of the team as far as I'm concerned.
he's a real administrator.
Yeah.
That's his line.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's what he sees his mission as.
I remember when we were looking for someone, all the requirements for the person that we wanted for that job were listed. Someone remarked, well, you haven't mentioned that he has to be able to walk on water. That was the only thing that was left out. But Carrie didn't even mind the multiple choices that
Demands, yeah.
had demands of him,
Yeah.
and he has certainly lived up to them.
Well, I can see how he is the person he is by knowing his mother. Belle is a special lady.
Mhm.
We'll move on now to some of the problems and successes that we've faced and talk a little bit about how we face these moments in our church history. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the decision to buy the Highland Road property. Gertrude, you alluded to it a little bit a moment ago. And what do you recall about the decision that was made to find more space and more room and so on?
Well, we had to buy it. In a sense of the word, we had to move. We were growing there beyond what capacity was available, and we wanted to do that. And I remember that the first idea was that we were moving away from the college students for whom it was originally intended. But it also became a reality that we had to have some local help to finance it. So if the local help was out this way and the space was out this way, I think we found the best place for it.
Maurice, you remember those days?
Yes, I remember the university, some committee in the university, I guess, had decided that they had too many cars on the campus, and therefore they brought out the rule that the freshmen could not have a car. It had to be, some colleges, Baylor has that. But, so what they did, the freshmen brought their cars down and parked them on Chime Street. And it was, we couldn't even get to our church.
That's right.
So, of course, they changed that rule. Cangelosi had a lot down there that he wanted.
That's an interesting insight in one of the decision-making variables. What Maurice has said is that the university did not have parking spaces for all the automobiles the students were bringing on campus, and they ruled it, and also thought it interfered with the freshmen's first year of college, so they banned them from parking cars on campus.
One rule we made that we were going to start 15 minutes early for our church service and be dismissed at 11:45 before all the other cars got trying to get out.
Yeah.
And we forgot that somewhere. We usually now go on till 12 anyway.
Okay, let's move to...
Well, there were about 28, as I remember, 28 people that signed the deeds over to the bank. And
The bank wouldn't loan us money just on the church's name.
no, we didn't have, church didn't have any property. But they took our names.
But they said if the individual church members would sign the mortgage and give their homes as security, that they would give us the money. And, I was one of the signers, so I can tell you that we had some little reflection, but we had enough faith that how many of us signed that?
28, I believe.
28.
I have a list at home.
Yeah, I have a church map. And we got the money, what was it, $40,000-$50,000 that we had to pay for this, their organization. On this.
Well, I can't remember any conflict discussions about it on much. We we did have kind of an influx of black members for a little while, which was fine. Had some choir members, which we needed. We had, as I recall, only one person who really joined our church, but she didn't stay with us very long. They would still be welcome, but I think we're a little too quiet and sedate for
Yeah.
their preference for what methods of worship.
But,
The board at that time. And we did have a controversy
at the board
at the
level.
board level.
Mhm.
We had, I don't know, must have been a month or so there,
Mhm.
when it was almost touch and go with some, because some felt very strongly. And, but we weathered it. I remember I told them that if a colored person were to present themselves for membership and we voted against it, just to say goodbye to me.
Who was our pastor at the
We're
time?
on the selection committee for our last pastor, and I guess the selection of staff, whether it's high or low, is very critical to our church and to all organizations. And we usually have been pretty deliberate in our process. Do you think that we follow the right procedures in selecting staff and that we have been successful in our selection of leaders for our church?
I think we have exactly the right procedure. It's a long procedure sometimes because I call it the steps of Baptist protocol. But through tradition, I suppose, we do certain things before we finally vote. But it is a democratic vote, and we do give opportunities for everybody to be informed. I don't see any way to improve it.
And how do you
myself.
feel about our success?
I think it's been good.
You think we've been pretty successful?
Well, I'm sure we have.
And
Well, I certainly think so.
okay. Well, I'm going to ask each of you individually one final question has meant to you. And I guess I'll start with Tossie since she's here on my right.
Well, it's really I feel in a way the only church home I have ever felt that I had. It's been so permanent for such a long time. It's been next to family. It still is. I feel that anything I need, the church will help with it. A lot has been said about the sacrifice that the members made when they mortgaged homes to pay for the property. I have never felt it was a sacrifice. It's always seemed to me to have been a privilege. And I think it's one of the blessings I've had to be a member of the University Baptist Church.
Maurice?
University Baptist Church has really been my life. And my family, I guess. I have, my two boys were baptized into this church. And one of them was a deacon in this church. And I feel like this is where I belong.
Preacher?
Well, the University Church here is really my family. Having no family, no blood kin family here, maybe I feel even closer to it than I would otherwise. But I haven't had a chance to be in any other church 50 years, and this is really just my home territory.
I think all of us feel that UBC has been our major support system for us and our families, and that we have a feeling that's pretty hard to describe about our church. And I think this is a commentary on what the church means to its members. Thank you.